Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kian Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
Corporate Explorer is the person who builds a new business from inside an existing corporation. You can be quite small and still have this Corporate Explorer. And certainly as you get larger, you need these people who are going to find the future for you. They're going to identify customer problems to solve. They're going to run experiments about different ways to solve them and different ways to commercialize the assets that you have. But they also tend to carry another mission in addition to being that sort of business builder. They're also incubating a new culture very often. There's something about the way they're working that teaches the organization about something different they need to learn, particularly being more agile, being more learning focused.
That was Andy Binns, co-founder and director of Change Logic, an award-winning author who publishes articles on innovation strategy and execution in established firms. In this episode, we were joined by an additional guest, Ellie Amirnasr, Director of Digital Ventures at MANN+HUMMEL. She's also a co-author, alongside Andy, of a chapter in Corporate Explorer Fieldbook, How to Build New Ventures in Established Companies. As you heard in the highlighted clip, their work with this just-released 2023 book brings to the forefront the Corporate Explorer, the individual within your organization that has the prowess to lead innovation. In this episode, we delve deep into these pioneers brimming with new ideas, and we discuss what is a corporate explorer and why are they so advantageous to your organization, how you as a leader can create a culture that paves the path for success for corporate explorers to innovate, the recipe and ingredients that spark innovation within an organization, and the distinct stages of innovation projects and what metrics to consider when deciding to continue funding a project at each stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy and Ellie. Andy and Ellie, thank you so much for being here. I know it took us a while to schedule this, and I'm thrilled that we finally get to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Kai. I'm really, really excited to be with you again.
So I want to start off with the same two questions I ask all of my guests. And Andy, you've answered these before. Maybe you have different answers. Ellie, let's start with you. If you could complete this sentence for me, this is just for us to get to know you a little bit more personally. They have nothing to do with your work. If you really know me, you know that.
If you really know me, you know that I love to explore, to create. I love traveling. And the reason I travel is actually putting myself out of my comfort zone constantly and exposing myself to unknowns, because I think that's how I learn the most. And that's what I'm known for.
Interesting. What do you think it is about being in a different place that changes your mindset or your openness to learning or something? What do you think it is?
I think when you are exposed to something that you're not used to or it's out of your routine, it triggers something in your mind. Either it's a survival mode or something that helps you to explore new things and try to figure out how to navigate through this new environment. I would say might be the survival mode that kicks in, and you will try to figure things out, be more creative in terms of getting through the day in this new environment. And that's what I really enjoy when I travel, because I don't know things and I have to figure things out. And sometimes it's very creative what you do, and it's completely out of your own routine.
Wow. Andy, same question for you. If you really know me, you know that.
Well, if you really know me, you know how much I like to sing.
Wow. I guess I don't know you that well. I didn't know this about you.
You know, if you're my wife, you're like, you've had enough, frankly. Most other people, one of my funnest things is when it's somebody's birthday in a restaurant and I start singing, because I trained as an opera singer, and I'm very, very loud. This happened in December, my wife's birthday in a restaurant here in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And the restaurant broke out into applause. And then a woman came up and said, "It's my birthday too. Will you sing to me as well?" And then a waitress comes along and she said, "One of the chefs is a pianist. Will you come out and do some Christmas songs at the piano?" I enjoy that a lot. Ellie knows this.
Yeah. Have you heard him sing before? Is that?
He started his speech in Stuttgart by singing, which I think people's eyes were just like, wow. All of a sudden, everything went quiet and everybody wanted to listen more. I was like, speak more.
So I gave them a bar of Mozart on the grounds that I wanted to talk about Germany and I don't speak any German, but I sing German.
Yes.
Can you sing it now? One more time.
What did I sing? Und Jesus unter Tiere schenkert, die Weisheit Geist dem Nonnenpaar.
Wow. Wow. We're going to get into our topic of corporate explorers in a moment, but I would like to start us off with strategy. I ask this of all my guests and get a different answer each time. What's your definition of strategy? Let's start with you, Andy, just to go in the other way.
Yeah, so like you, Kaihan, I spent time at McKinsey, very strategy, strategy is very important. I don't believe in strategy anymore. I'm like, strategy is so over. And it's over because it traps you into the fallacy of planning, the fallacy that you can map out the future in a series of predictable steps, instead of putting you in the frame of learning, right? How do I do something to teach me what customers actually value? How do I frame up even a product launch as something that I'm going to discover and then iterate and build on? And this is really vitally important in this scale of change that we have in markets, the scale of disruption that exists, the number of different ways in which, you can lose markets. And there are too many examples of people screwing this up. In the book Corporate Explorer, I talk about GE Digital and their difficulties with their efforts in industrial Internet of Things. Oh, by the way, Siemens did the same, right? So, they were happy for GE to get all the attention for this, but Siemens are doing so. You can look at Goldman Sachs and their consumer bank. It's the same story, right? People just making these big old bets on a great strategy because they'd hired, younger versions of me and Kaihan to do lots of good analysis and all the rest of it. But turns out that you can't predict the way the markets are going to unfold. And so I think strategy has become too much about planning, and I want to talk about business experimentation.
I gotcha. Yes, I love that distinction. Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the difference between planning and preparation, and we'll get into that. Ellie, how about for you? What's your definition of strategy?
I mean, listening to Andy, I actually question a little bit how I think about the strategy now. But for me, to be honest, the strategy is building blocks that makes purposeful and valuable architecture, which in this case is an organization. These building blocks are a combination of choices and actions that position the organization within its industry and its segment to achieve their vision over the long term. You will always have the frame of the building, which is your core business, and you always have the option for renovation. You can change the house of things that you're doing. You can change the look inside or like the services that you offer through that organization. But the foundation and the skeleton and the frame and the long-term vision, how people see you will stay kind of the same. And that's for me, a strategy is a combination of features, acts, decisions that brings a picture, a visual, purposeful picture to outside people.
Right. I love that metaphor. Ellie, we've already heard a bit of your background, of course, and I've met you already and read a lot about you just to have our audience understand what you're known for. You've done many, many things, but one thing that you're known for within MANN+HUMMEL is qlair and what that has evolved into. Can you just tell us what that is?
Sure. Within MANN+HUMMEL, I'm, as you said, I'm known for qlair, which is the digital solution for clean air management. MANN+HUMMEL mission is to provide a solution for clean air, clean water, and clean mobility. They have multiple things that they do. They provide physical products for that. They provide services. And my role was to look into digital solution for clean air management. And that's where in 2018, I co-founded the first corporate startup of MANN+HUMMEL, focusing on this topic. It evolved to become a much bigger thing right now. And we're looking at different aspects of clean air management solution. But also we evolved in terms of looking into digital solutions for clean air, clean water, and clean mobility. That's how I gained the title of kind of a corporate explorer as well, because I had to get my head out and it's like, okay, I learned here, what can I find in the other location or in the other industry that MANN+HUMMEL has sub foot in the door. So internally, the co-founder, externally, corporate explorer. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. And Andy, you chose Ellie to contribute a chapter on the hunter strategy. I want to get into what that is, but just in terms of like laying out the definitional elements of this conversation, you would call Ellie, I assume, a corporate explorer. And so my question, could you just define corporate explorers? Because we know a lot of people say, hey, we've got corporate executives and leaders. Entrepreneurs are the ones that do the innovation. Then the corporations acquire those and then they, scale them, that there's a symbiotic relationship. But you talk about this, something in the middle. Who's that?
So for me, a corporate explorer is the person who builds a new business from inside an existing corporation. And actually, it doesn't really matter what size of corporation. I was just talking to a company the other day that's like 5 years old, and they have a corporate explorer because they see a new opportunity to leverage what they've got in a different market. You can be quite small and still have this corporate explorer. And certainly as you get larger, you need these people who are going to find the future for you. They're going to identify customer problems to solve. They're going to run experiments about different ways to solve them and different ways to commercialize the assets that you have. But they also tend to carry another mission in addition to being that sort of business builder. They're also incubating a new culture very often. There's something about the way they're working that teaches the organization about something different they need to learn, particularly being more agile, being more learning focused.
Gotcha. So Ellie, having been a corporate explorer, being a corporate explorer, what are some of the aspects that an organization needs to have in place in order to enable corporate explorers? Like what made it possible for you? And maybe had you done this in a different company and they didn't have that in place, it might have been more difficult.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question because there are a few key elements that you really need for this kind of setup to be successful. One is definitely a sponsor within the organization, somebody that has high influence within MANN+HUMMEL. The CTO and the CDO of the company is the sponsor for that. But also you need a top management buy-in. I would say the top management buy-in can be in two ways. One is like they would completely give it hands off to someone and then says like, go ahead and do it. The other one is, which that's the case in MANN+HUMMEL, which I actually really like because it gives you some guidance. They said, this is the structure. This is the framework that we have to go through or we are used to. And then they allow you to lead them up. They allow you to go figure out if something is not working and listen to you and empower you and trust you to explore it. And if you fail, you come back with a proposal and they'll let you do that. And they guide you through this. So it's not completely hands off because I definitely need a coaching. I don't know everything in this world, or definitely not everything about MANN+HUMMEL DNA, although I worked for that company for 10 years, but still in the top management, they know what MANN+HUMMEL needs and where they want to be. They know everything about it. And I need the coaching from them to like, yeah, we have been there, this path, it will not work. You can go try this one. This is a no-no for us. It's not fitting our strategy or our DNA or anything. What really worked for me and for our team is having a top management that admit that they don't know everything. They listen to us. We have at MANN+HUMMEL, they call it filter value, which is like F stands for focus, I integrity, L leadership, T trust, E empowerment, and R results. And I would say I experienced that very tangibly, the trust and empowerment that resulted in the result at the end.
And for listeners who are wondering why that spells filter, can you tell us why does it spell filter?
MANN+HUMMEL is a filter company and their vision is leadership and filtration. And filter is the bread and butter that they produce and it fits well with the value they bring.
Gotcha. So let me ask you, Andy, you spend a lot of time coaching senior leaders, right? And you lay out that there are these different modes. There's the core mode and there's the explorer mode or the ambidextrous parts of the organization. But I would imagine that even if a leader says, yes, I want corporate explorers like Ellie building our future, there are probably some things that are automatic for them that they may not be aware of. What are some of the shifts that management needs to make in order to enable corporate explorers?
I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, with the clear exception of MANN+HUMMEL, it's almost never perfect, right? It is really hard. And one of the challenges that if you're going to be a corporate explorer, I think you need to get into is you're never going to completely win. You never have everybody's full buy-in. It's a phrase we use, and Ellie used it, and I use it too. But actually, it's not quite going to happen that way. Why? Well, because they're living in a context as well. The results of the company goes up and down. Their pressures of key customers change. The colleagues around them change. The board has different pressures and needs and requirements. There's an activist shareholder out there. There's all of these different pressures that come down onto a senior executive. And one of the things that as corporate explorers or innovators that we need to, I think, let go of is the notion of good, bad, right, wrong. We need to assume positive intention. And even when senior executives do things we don't like, that's not because they're bad people, right? It's because they are making choices based on the context they're in. Now, does that mean you give up when you face an obstacle? Absolutely not. And indeed, one of the chapters in the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook that we just published this week is about how do you raise the stakes, raise the tension in conversations with senior executives. Because there comes times when you really need to highlight to them that what they're asking you to do is going to fail and going to be something that they're not happy about in retrospect. And let me give you an example of a real story I heard about 6 months ago where the executive admits they failed to do this. This is a bank in the United States. They did a huge amount of research into the idea of building a direct-to-consumer digital channel bank, no bricks and mortar. And they did a bunch of research. And they said, wow, this is going to be a really big growth vector for us, right? They didn't use McKinsey, but they might have done, right? And, lots of fabulous charts about it. And the head of strategy who told us this story says he put together his plan and he went to the board. And he said, look, I just want a few million to get started, 6 months, and we'll see whether there is something there to do. And they said, no, you are being too conservative. You need to act more like a startup. And here's 500 million, and I want the whole thing built and in the market within a year. And you know what happened? As soon as they got into the market, they found they couldn't actually afford to spend the even more money that was required in order to have the kind of consumer brand that it would take to win. That was knowable before they spent the money on the IT architecture that underpinned it and so on, right? That was a moment where the corporate explorer needed to say no. They needed to raise the tension in the conversation and explain why it is that this was going to kill innovation. Well-intentioned, same thing. That CEO was perfectly well-intentioned in terms of trying to capture the market ahead of its, maturity and all of these motivations. But the decision was poor, and it was based out of impatience rather than learning. Because the trouble with senior executives, they're used to being the top. They're used to being the biggest in their segment of the market, right? That's how they get to be incumbents for a length of time. And that bleeds over into how they do anything new. And it's exactly the thing that they need to unlearn in order to be successful.
Yeah, it seems like you've described two distinct situations or cases or stages, let's say, and metrics have to be different, leadership has to be different, funding has to be different, all of that has to be different. Ellie, maybe you could just help us, because I know in your chapter, you've broken down some stages. Maybe you could introduce those distinctions of the stages that a project might be at from, hey, here's maybe an idea to, I feel comfortable investing 500 million to pull the trigger on this.
Sure. I actually started smiling when Andy said that, because very early on when we started, we had a conversation that the corporate executive told us, well, look, one of the biggest concerns from startups is money, and they don't have the safety. But when we are giving you so much money and you have the safety, so you should be faster than the startup. And I was just like, no, you still have to validate the customer, the project, and the willingness to pay and the readiness of the market and all of these things that comes on the early stage. That's how I had to actually go out, not only like teach myself, but also come back with this idea of like, okay, here is how the startup phases or innovation phase that will fit in the cycle of business development works. We start with ideation. In startup world, we go with seed phase, and then we go with launching, and then you go to growth, and then you go to expansion. So can't really shortcut. And because you have more money and your founders or whatever have safety, jump to launch and then have an app and then expect $1 million from it. It doesn't work like this. You still have to validate some hypothesis as early as an ideation. And that is not financial validation. It is very, very much so non-financial. And if you want to know how to figure out if we're making progress or not, we need to look into some of the leading metrics, which is mainly activity-based and non-financial, rather than lagging metrics, which is more financial-based, or even like, number of units sold, or this much sales or revenue or gross margin. These are all lagging in the after launch phase. Before launch, you still have a lot of work to do. And usually you have to spend less money and evaluate and invalidate more hypotheses early on. And then as you get through this launch phase and then going to growth, you start spending more money to what we call it a cycle of validation, repeatability, scalability, and profitability. And then you can't game it and then go to the last one before you go through the first one. So when it comes to scalability, that's where the most of the money needs to be spent. And then you have to be more smart in the dollar that you spend early on in the validation and repeatability phase. So that's how we had to educate ourselves and explain it, and then change the way we were doing innovation, or I would say exploratory innovation within MANN+HUMMEL.
So you're not just saying, hey, don't look at my revenue yet. Don't look at my ROI. You're saying, no, look at this other thing instead, which is a leading. To bring that to life for us, could you just give us an example of 1 or 2 or 3 leading metrics that you track at the seed and launch stage?
Absolutely. I think this is a good time to jump on the hunter strategy, because it's very, very depending on what type of business you're going after. There is an interesting analogy from Christopher Jansen. I hope that I'm pronouncing his name right. It's called hunter strategy. And he says 5 ways to build $100 million SaaS business or digital business. It actually breaks it into animals analogy. So if you're a hunter and you're hunting a small animal, which is a mouse or a fly even, there is a different way of approaching that business, because that's kind of a B2C or business to consumer market. And it has smaller sales cycle, so shorter sales cycle. The consumer has a different decision model and decision-making process. And as your animal grows to rabbit and deer and elephant, the decision-making process gets more complicated. It's more going to B2B. So there are more people in there to make decisions. Deal sizes grow. The sales cycles grow from hours, which is for the flies, and it's a push of a button, to months when it's an elephant, because it needs to get approved by the board. It's like, a budget of $100,000 or $500,000 or something like that. And if you start categorizing your business, first of all, early on, like I'm a B2C or a B2B, or like, this big one, like an elephant, then you start thinking about your business differently. You start thinking about what are the metrics that I need early on. And early on, to validate a hypothesis if your idea will work for a B2C might be just building a landing page, put click for a demo, pre-order it or something like that, and measure those click rates, even without having a product. Sometimes minimal viable product is just a landing page of the idea of the product that you can push the button and collect what is the readiness of the market to actually take that product. When it goes to a bigger size animal, it comes to like number of customers you visit, number of proposal you maybe submit to them, or number of pilots, customers' letter of intents, for example. Or some of these things is the example of the leading metrics, and really depends on the hypothesis that you want to validate. Is it product-based? Is it business-based? Is it market-based? We even went to an extent of the marketing. Everybody thinks that, marketing, actually, I learned that marketing is not just banners and trade shows and everything. Marketing is actually science, to be honest with you, because people get their information in different ways and from different channels. Not everybody gets it on LinkedIn. Not everybody gets it on Google. Sometimes is a traditional way. Sometimes it's word of mouth. So we had to run that experiment with all these 3 ventures that we had: clean air, clean water, clean mobility. Where do they get their information from? We called it marketing voice of customer. And then based on that, put our metrics of like how many, for example, in water was trade shows, and mobility was magazines, and in air was Google. So completely 3 different things. Again, still simple, similar size animal maybe, but then our metrics was completely different in terms of measuring our marketing.
What this sort of bee, elephant, etc. metaphor does really nicely is it says, look, what are you trying to build towards? What does success look like? And then work backwards from that to understand what you've got to measure in order to understand whether or not you're on track. Now, that requires of a corporate explorer a few things. One of them is to be bold enough to say what it is you're trying to achieve. Because if you're not clear about that, if you think you can just kind of fumble your way towards it, you'll never have that end goal defined. And therefore, you'll never have the lead indicators telling you whether or not you're on path, right? And it's a repeating conversation, which is why my energy level may have gone up. Because I'm like, oh no, I have this conversation so often. Because they're fearful of seeming to be accountable for what it is they're going to put out there. Yeah, but in our company, if we say a number, that's going to be a goal that we're going to be responsible for. And I understand this point. But the alternative of just never saying a number, never declaring what it is you're trying to achieve, is you look like you're not accountable and you never have a way of measuring yourself or others understanding what you're trying to do. So you actually deny yourself legitimacy when you do this. So you've got to raise the tension. You've got to actually put yourself out there and risk things. And this is where corporate explorers are like entrepreneurs, if you will, right? There's something at risk. In the world of the entrepreneur, yeah, your livelihood is at risk. Your house is at risk. Your earnings are at risk. As a corporate explorer, your career is at risk because you're in a social system where everybody knows whether you succeeded or failed. And so this tends people to pull back towards safety. That's the wrong choice because if you're never accountable, if you're never transparent, it's really, really hard when you face problems because people don't know the cause of those problems. They assume it's you and they assume that you're somehow being deceptive. You deny them something that they can recognize that gives them a way of evaluating your performance. And that's just never good.
Gotcha. If I just pull on that a little bit, what is it that stating a measurable goal, what I want to achieve up front, how does that change how people interact with you or how leadership treats you or how the organization supports or doesn't support you? What is the mechanism that makes it more likely to be successful if you state up front what you're building and what success is?
Ellie, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. The approach that we're trying to take is the one step at a time, trying to break that bigger goal that we have to smaller set of goals in different stages, and then try to break them into some of the actions that we have to take. I always like to think this way. I'm swimming towards an island, okay? I will survive if I take a breath at a time and swim that direction. But if I always keep my head down and don't come up and look at my direction, either I might mislead and then it's just like, go in a different direction and completely miss my target, or there might be a ship coming in front of me blocking my view, and I have to pivot and adjust how am I going to go to that target or to that island. And that's why I said one step or one breath at a time, I will walk through that goal, but every now and then I'll come up and see, is there any roadblocks? Am I still on the path? If I'm good, I do it. If not, I strategize and go around and then try to go back on track where my ultimate goal is.
Got it. That's a beautiful metaphor. Very clear. Andy, you're about to respond to that.
Yeah, it's your thing. What's my ambition? And what are those incremental steps that are all about learning to find out how I'm going to get there? And, you may also discover the ambition is not possible or it's bigger than you thought. But the alternative is you fumble your way towards an ambition. And in a corporation, you're much more likely to undershoot, to go for safety. Because surely, if I just do a little thing, people will fund that for me. There's less of an ask. It doesn't sound so crazy. But it's also less consequential. It attracts less interest. And it misses the opportunity, which is, frequently, as we know, one of the challenges that corporate innovation has. So this notion of ambition coupled with the experimentation approach, I think is extremely powerful.
Yeah, we had one CEO on, he talked about the castle on the hill. You got to build the castle on the hill that people want to start climbing toward. So I've got so many questions that we're not going to have time for because we're reaching the top of our time with you. I want to close with two questions. The first one is, at the end of listening to this podcast, there is a leader who's saying, yes, we need to make this change. There is an employee saying, yes, I am a corporate explorer. You're going to tell them something right now. And then a month or two from now, they're going to think, wow, I would have made a big mistake, but I listened to that podcast. What's the big mistake that you see either leaders or corporate explorers making? And what advice can you give them now to help them preempt that?
The big mistake is they start with an idea, not a problem. Start with a customer problem to solve, rather than with your great idea that you think is like fantastic. Ideas are addictive. We as human beings love to see possibilities. We love to develop ideas. They're really great. But if they become disconnected from problems in the world, things that people need to get done, you're always going to be in this catch-up mode of trying to fit the idea to the world and the problem, the market, the customer. Start with the customer problem. Obsess about what it is that the customers are actually trying to get done and what stands in the way today. And if you can solve those problems, that's unlocking all of the creativity and all of the possibility. All the books that you write, Kaihan, become so much more fabulously valuable because I'm starting from the right anchor point.
That's great. Yeah. You're seeding that idea in rich ground because there's actually a problem. Thank you. How about you, Ellie?
I second what Andy said, but I also would tell a corporate explorer, dare to fail and celebrate the learnings. In corporation, we avoid failure, and that's the risk of keeping zombie projects going and going and going because we don't want to admit. And then we have to learn that failure is not having a negative vibe with it. If it has for you, call it learnings, and then dare to learn, put yourself out there, go explore to be able to create something new.
Love it. Thank you. You've just saved people a lot of future heartache and improved their chance of success. How can people continue to follow each of you and learn from you? Certainly, they should run out and buy the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook. And we can't see here, but Andy's holding up a picture. I had a chance to contribute one chapter to this as well. It is amazing, just the depth and practicality and breadth of the content that you cover in each of these chapters. So definitely that. What else should people do to get your support along their Explorer journey?
thecorporateexplorer.com, or find me on LinkedIn, Andrew J.M. Binns, or come to one of my concerts. No, it's just joking.
Right. Your opera concerts. And Ellie, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and Ellie.Amirnasr, so easy to reach.
And we've had lots of podcasts and videos of you as well, so there's great content out there for you. Lovely. Well, Ellie and Andy, thank you so much for the work you do and for packaging it in such a useful form for us and taking some time to share it with us here. It's great having you on.
Thanks, Kaihan. Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our executive producer, Karina Reyes, our editor, Zach Ness, our audio engineer, Jack Tipper, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kaihan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Outthinkers.